Hello, everybody.
Hi, Daddy.
Welcome to the Sam and Ryan channel. My name is Sam.
My name's Ryan.
And this is Versus. Today, we are going to be doing Gen Z versus Millennial.
Yas.
I was born July 11th, 1999, so I am on the older end of the Gen Z generation. I think in 2021, if you are the ages of 6 and 22, somewhere around there, you're Gen Z.
I was born June 14th, 1993, which makes me a very young millennial. I believe the millennial is like between I think the early 80s and the early 90s, something like that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, just quick side note on the topic of generations, for some reason, I don't picture 40-year-olds today as millennials.
Okay, boomer. I kind of feel like old people just sort of call kids these days millennials.
Yeah.
I sort of feel like if you're in your 60s, millennial is just like anything younger than 45. I feel like older people don't really talk in terms of iGen, Gen Z, and millennial, that actually young people now are broken up into 3 separate categories, but they're just all lumped in as millennials, which I think is a weird thing that those old people do. But anyway, we're young and beautiful, and that's all that matters. So this is a very senior Gen Z versus a very junior millennial, talking about the differences of our generations that are societally perceived. But interestingly enough, we actually have a lot of crossover because we are very close in age and both very cuspy in terms of the cutoffs for these particular generations, which is why I think this conversation is going to be absolutely illuminating, and I bet you just can't wait for us to get started. If you haven't seen Versus before, it's pretty obvious. One person is one thing, the other person is another thing. We have a bowl of questions in the middle. We answer the questions with our individual perspectives, and then you subscribe, and comment below and tell us how pretty you think we are. So without further ado, I think I should go first. Age before beauty, you know what I mean? I just went for the
top.
Oh, what a fantastic first question.
Okay.
What is the best thing about your generation? Starting off nice and positive. Best thing about millennials, I think, is how woke they are. And I'm actually not being facetious. I think that one of the biggest sort of things that differentiates millennials and whatever comes before millennials, Gen X, is it feels to me that, Gen X, boomers, all them, the oldies, especially when you look at the way people vote and the way people engage politically, young people are very obsessed with the notion that no matter who you are, what you believe in, who you look like, or who you love, you deserve basic human dignity and all of the rights afforded to you by the United States Constitution.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a pretty fantastic thing, and it seems very obvious that the people older than us don't feel that way. And I know that the younger generations that succeed millennials feel that way too, but I sort of feel like millennials walked so that all y'alls could run.
Sure.
Millennials sort of started the wokeism of no, you know what? You can throw anything new at us. We accepted gay, we accepted trans, we accepted any color that you are, we accepted any religion that you are. We really started this thing of it doesn't matter. Whoever you are is enough to be afforded basic equity and human dignity. And I think that's dope. And I think that is the best thing about us.
I would say for Gen Z, I think the best thing about Gen Z is it's full of a bunch of go-getters, a lot of young, passionate, self-sufficient people who have all of the information that the internet has to offer. Being raised in fully a digital age, I feel you see so many young entrepreneurs just taking off. People starting their own Etsy shops, YouTubers, TikTokers. I just feel it's a generation who wants to see things get done, and that can be in the political world. I immediately think about the Parkland kids, and the wave of activism in Gen Z as well. But also just they want to see things happen for themselves. So people are starting their own businesses. And if you want to learn how to do anything, you just look it up on the internet. And I think Gen Z is a prime example of being raised in a culture of anything I want to know how to do, I can teach myself.
Yeah.
And make it happen.
I love that. That's very cool. And yeah, I mean, like, millennials were raised with the internet too, but and I think some of us were that savvy,
sure,
but not all of us. And I think a lot of the times for millennials, the internet was just sort of like a conduit to getting attention. And Gen Z does that too.
Memes.
But Gen Z, like, I definitely like having more of a holistic view of the internet and like how this can be like a tool for like my betterment, my occupation, my economy, all of those things. That's really an interesting observation and contrast, I think, between the two. Pick one, boo-boo.
Okay. Ah, nice. What is the worst thing about your generation?
Oh, wow. Just hit us with the 1-2 punch here.
I know.
All right. All right.
It's funny because of the answer I just gave, but I think the worst thing about Gen Z is how dependent we are on the internet. In all aspects, like educationally, like I don't know that I retained as much information from my schooling experience as probably millennials or the generation above them did, because there were a lot of times where I could just Google my homework questions. Mm-hmm. You know, I can just find it on the internet, not copy paste, because plagiarism is bad. But like, yeah. It's just, okay, I just know the answers now. Mm-hmm. I didn't retain a lot of that information. And also, socially, I think the way that you are able to build relationships on the internet is a beautiful thing. And I do think that those are real and valid relationships. However, I also have a sense of concern for my generation that the ability to make friends and have relationships in person, like to meet a stranger at a party and become their friend, like I feel like that social skill isn't as practiced. And so I'm afraid that that's going to get lost, especially with iGen below us.
Yeah.
You know, just some of those real world experiences I feel like Gen Z might be missing out on because of all of the new experiences that the internet can give you.
Right, because digital experiences like have merit and are valuable, but they don't take the place of physical experiences. And you know, I think your concern is well founded and also backed up by the science. I mean, when you look at the statistics, teen suicide is up, teen relationships are down. 25% of teenagers polled say that they don't have friends, and another 25% says they don't even have an acquaintance.
Yeah.
Physical friendships, physical acquaintances. Again, I'm not, like you said, I think it's a very important point you made. Digital relationships are great and have their merits, but we are physical beings. We need to have those physical, real world experiences and relationships, and that is very concerning.
And it is interesting though, because as I say that, I will say in the last 2 years maybe, I have seen a portion of Gen Z kind of wake up to that and acknowledge like, okay, like we need to go outside more, and like I want to like make friends like they did in 90s movies, you know? Like even if this kind of like self-awareness is coming from the nostalgia for a time we didn't actually experience, I'm kind of like, I'll welcome that.
Yeah.
If that's what it takes to wake us up.
Well, right. I mean, I don't think it's nostalgia for like the 90s. I think it's nostalgia for humanity.
Yeah.
Like we cannot replace humanity with the digitized copy of it. It can be an addition to the human experience, but it's not a replacement. What?
You're giving me Steve Jobs vibes with all this technology talk and this turtleneck.
Oh, lols. Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Sam and Ryan would love to introduce our brand new line of products. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I mean, so it's funny that you said that like the internet is the best thing and also the worst thing about them, because that's how I feel about my generation. Wokeness is one of the best things that defines my generation, and wokeness is one of the worst things that defines my generation. I feel very strongly that millennials are very efficient at woke posturing, that it is a way to absorb and galvanize political power on the internet, to be on the right side of the commonly held Twitter opinion, and that you either feel this way and you're with us, or you don't feel this way and you're against us. That wokeism has become like a weapon to use to like ruin and exclude people, to call them out, rather than a tool to help and include people, to call them in.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing that I said, the best part about our generation is that we were like, everyone's welcome because we're woke. But wokeism has also led to, if you don't feel the way that we feel based on this that generated the most retweets, you are not welcome. And that's not wokeism. That's a denial of freedom of speech and expression, and it's something that used to be great taken to a really sort of preposterous extreme. And I just find it so incredibly annoying, all of the woke posturing and the virtue signaling of like, I'm so smart and I care so much, when you really don't. You think you're an activist because you retweeted something and then you go to bed resting easy at night, and it's like you didn't actually do anything, like, because Twitter isn't real. So it's an interesting thing that like both of our generations have sort of created this illusionist reality on the internet that serves them. It fills a void. Like, both of our generations can fill the void of our culture with the internet without actually genuinely filling the void. It's that dopamine hit thing. And millennials, you're really, really annoying when you do that, and you need to stop. All right.
Next question.
It's starting to heat up. I felt my pulse increase on that one. What is the biggest impact your generation has had on society? Okay. Just because of what I just talked about, the first thing that comes to my mind is a negative impact, which is like cancel culture. Like, I feel like we very much spearheaded the movement of like, if you can galvanize enough political power on the internet, you can literally disappear someone. I think that impact is kind of tearing at the fabric of society, if I'm completely honest.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that on this channel a few times. If I have to pick a positive one, I would say that like, I think that millennials sort of began this trend of redefining work. You know, you don't see people working the same job for the same company for 40 years and collecting their pension and calling it a day. You see people who, you know, work at the tailor down the street 4 days a week and also do Uber Eats on the weekends and also, you know, make passive income from their blogs, and, you know, like that it's sort of like this sort of entrepreneurial gig economy spirit that I think was defined by millennials. And I think a lot of that also came from like, I want to do work with purpose. Collecting a pension and being a cog in a big machine, having the white picket fence in the suburbs, that is not the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. The things that gets me out of bed in the morning is having work with purpose. And if I have to subsidize the work with purpose by doing gigs on the side to, you know, keep my lights on, fine, but I need to be doing something that is contributing to the greater good, which sort of pairs with the sort of general wokeism on the good side of things that I think the millennials are sort of responsible for.
I would say that the biggest impact Gen Z has had on society is the normalization of activism and speaking out on social media.
Oh.
The normalization of talking about mental health. Immediately, I think of the survivors of the Parkland shooting. You know, Gen Z, like, ready to actually take action and spreading the action they are taking on social media, using social media as an actual tool. I totally see your point of like, yeah, retweeting something, like that's not activism. But I feel like Gen Z has started to figure out how to actually use social media as a tool to impact the world.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because when you initially said that, I was like, well, millennials did that, but actually, I know a lot. I remember a lot of millennials, like especially with like a lot of Black Lives Matter stuff. Like millennials were being like, the internet doesn't count. Like, you can't use this to activate, but it turns out you can.
But it does. You can. And I think that Gen Z
figured that out. The Trump rally. When a bunch of like TikTokers got a bunch of people to like buy ghost tickets for that Trump rally to inflate those numbers and made him look like a total clown. Millennials were at their most impressionable as the totality of the internet first started to transition to being totalitarian. It's on our phones, it's in our schools, it's on our video game consoles. The internet is everywhere. We were impressionable when that transitioned. You came up with that already being in place.
Exactly.
So you have a much better and more fundamental understanding of how it can be used, again, in a totalitarian sense, rather than with more of a limited scope like we do. Fascinating. This conversation's great. 2 more questions. Make it
All right.
count.
Do you associate with your generation? Yes and no.
Yeah.
You know, like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm on the older end of the Gen Z generation. Sometimes there are memes that go viral or like new lingo is introduced that I wasn't a part of like the conceptualizing of. So it takes me a second to learn it, but I can probably learn it faster than another generation.
I don't even know if that's generational or if that's just about age, because I don't think the reason that I'm like not as hip with the lingo is because I'm a millennial. I think it's because I'm almost 30 and like
Millennial?
No, but not because I'm a millennial, but because I am old enough to not care.
Oh,
like
I see.
Eventually you hit a certain age where you don't need to be popular by like saying the right words, and if you don't
Sure.
say them, you hate what, because it's like I don't really care about your opinion of me. I have my friends, and I'm not looking for new ones.
Sure.
Like,
So I think with Gen Z, it's like I still relate in some ways because I am a part of Gen Z and I'm very much like on the internet. But it also took me forever to get on the Fortnite train. You know what I mean? Like there are just some things that pop off and I'm like, I don't really get it. On the other end though, I have a lot of older siblings who are all millennials. And so there are aspects of like the millennial generation that I'm aware of or have rubbed off on me.
Right.
You know, like there are all those BuzzFeed quizzes that are like, only millennials can pass this quiz, and I always pass them.
Yeah.
Like it's just like, I don't think it's like that fine-tuned. So I do associate with Gen Z and I don't.
right, and it's sort of like, okay, yeah, do I associate with my like millennialness? I mean, I guess I associate it with the same way that I associate with Gemini, which is like I don't. That being said though, like I think it's far more important to me to be a well-rounded individual than it is for me to associate with a group between the ages of 1981 and 1994.
Yeah.
Like I have friends in their 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, early 20s, like I like the way that people younger than me think. I like the way that people older than me think for very different reasons. And I like to take what is useful to me and apply it to myself so I can be a more well-rounded individual. But I'm not one of those people who's like, okay, boomer, like you have no value because you're old. It's like, no, you have an incredible amount of value because you've lived 2 times longer than me. I associate, I think, for the reasons that like are sociologically profound, and all of the other ones I could do without, on top of the fact that I am absolutely one of the first people to criticize my own generation because, oh my God, some of the stuff that we do is so annoying. Last question, here we go. What do you think defines your generation? Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about my generation, but I'm also sort of thinking about yours. I feel like it's kind of impossible. It's the internet. I mean,
technology.
Like futurists have talked about this a lot, that like, you know, technology advances on an exponential curve, which is to say it's slow for a long time, and once it hits the inflection point, it's rapidly accelerating.
Yes.
And when you look at humanity on a grand spectrum of being around for hundreds of thousands of years, like that inflection point is going to last for a long time, and both of our generations are like right in the middle of it.
Exactly.
Where like, you know, 150 years ago there weren't cars or lights, and now we're like in space and we can communicate with each other at the speed of thought, and that's insane. And so like I think that it's technology and like the internet and social media, like all of those things are sort of the same for us, even though I think it's advancing incrementally. I think that all of the good that has been done for both of our generations on the behest of the internet are noteworthy, and all of the bad things that the internet is doing to our generation is noteworthy as well. I always talk about this. I think that social media is to our generation what cigarettes were to the generation before us, that 30 years from now we're going to see all of these studies of the way that this is killing us, and we're already starting to see it. That documentary,
The Social
Dilemma is just like social media can start wars.
I agree with everything you just said.
The other thing that's interesting just to think about is like the way that tragedy defines a generation. You know, you think about the way the Vietnam War defined a generation, the assassinations of JFK and MLK defining a generation. You know, for millennials, I feel like it's 9/11. Like,
Interesting.
I remember being a child before 9/11, and the rule was like, go outside and play. We don't care where you go. We don't care who it's with. When the streetlights go out at 7 p.m., then you come home. 9/11 happened, and when you get there, you call us. When you're leaving, you call us. You have to be home before the street lamps are. I'm actually, never mind, I'm just going to come pick you up. I'll just wait for you when the bus gets back. Don't even walk home from. Like, suddenly, nothing was safe.
Wow.
And I remember that sort of defining the way that we grew up and the way that we, talked about global terrorism and the way that we talked about, government and the massive, national defense infrastructure and the crazy bloated budget and the way that that's affected, where our tax dollars go and how much money goes to our education and stuff like that.
So fascinating. And such a good point. Like, tragedy does define and impact a generation. Like, I grew up in a post 9/11 world, basically, and so I grew up with a lot of those changes in place already.
Right.
But for me, the tragedy that has unfortunately continuously impacted my generation is shootings. Mass shootings have become so much more common, and obviously there was like Columbine and like a couple
Sandy
of
Hook.
like Sandy Hook, like a couple that like really rocked the world, and unfortunately the United States decided to do nothing about it.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in schools where we did do school shooting drills.
Right, and we never did.
And yeah, you probably
Even just
never
being
did.
born 6 years before you.
And it was continuously a part of the conversation. A kid brought a gun to a school dance of mine, and it turned into a whole thing. Thankfully, nothing happened, but like he had the intent of using it. And it became a much more common conversation. And like we've all seen today, mass shootings happen
Like
all the
60
time.
a month now, yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that we've become basically like desensitized to because we have access to all of the information and all of like every time that they happen. Like we basically get alerts for it, and it's just like, oh my God, another one. And it's just such a sad tragedy that continuously impacts the way that Gen Z has gone through the schooling system, because a lot of them happen at schools. And so it's like that, unfortunately, is something that definitely impacts, and I think,
Potentially even
defines Gen Z.
Well,
A light note.
Yep, we love to end it on a happy note.
Jeez.
I'm obsessed with this conversation.
Yeah,
though.
I am too.
This is one of my favorite videos we've made in a while.
Yeah.
Hey, good game.
Good game.
A lot of your generation makes fun of me on TikTok, but
Yeah.
for the most part, if you're an example of who your generation is, I think y'all are good people.
Oh, you're okay. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm kidding. Thank you. That was very kind. Love and appreciate you. Ryan, millennials are cool too. Sorry.
As always, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave your thoughts down in the comments below, unless they're negative, in which case we don't care. We love you, Daddy, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, everybody.